Hello, Yakri here with another Artifact video. So this is going to be sort of a preface to future content I create and conversations I want to have about the game, more than like a big guide or independent discussion of something. So this is kind of a proposition for / explanation about how I intend to talk about the game, in terms of the chunks of gameplay that you have in Artifact, because Artifact has a very interesting turn system it's fairly different from how we usually think of turns in a game. In particular, it's more spread out, more split up, and there aren't any really great direct parallels in terms of turns. There's some things that are kind of close. Let me jump into it. How about that? I think we can break Artifact's gameplay up into about three meaningful chunks that are actually like worth discussing, and thinking about the game in these chunks I think can be helpful. So you can think of it in terms of the rounds, which is playing through all three lanes, and then playing through the buy phase and the deploy phase as well. I'd say from the beginning of a deploy phase until the buy phase at the end of the round is a good way to think of a round in Artifact. And then you have the lanes, right? So each lane itself can be thought of as a separate chunk of gameplay, and then you have actions inside of the lanes that can be thought of as a individual chunk of gameplay. So let's talk about each of these in turn. So rounds are meaningful because your resources increase as rounds go up. You draw cards, you get more mana for your towers, and you progress your game plan. I guess this is a little bit of a vague third option. You can buy items and stuff as well. So the game moves along as rounds go by. Heroes redeploy. That is also an important aspect of rounds. So rounds are pretty obviously meaningful, and the game is already being discussed by internal players and whatnot in terms of rounds a lot, like mana turns and whatnot, mana rounds, right? Okay, so let's talk about lanes. Why are lanes worth separating out from rounds? Well, each lane has an individual mana pool, so that's one aspect. How you play on each lane is probably a little bit different. Earlier lanes are somewhat more important than the later lanes, to most ways of thinking, because the earlier lanes can affect the later lanes in that round. But if you're on a, let's call them by numbers. If you're on the third lane, you can affect the first lane, but it's going to affect the first lane after the round has ended and your opponent has had a chance to draw cards and get more options and whatnot. Whereas if you, say, affect the second lane from the first lane, then you're going to be going directly into that lane that you just affected, so you can kind of combo things together between lanes like that. So there's that aspect of splitting things up between lanes. They have some other independent resources. You could consider the color of heroes available in a particular lane to be a resource that lane has, that differentiates it from other lanes. And I think that pretty much covers why lanes are important. There's also initiative, right? You can consider lanes an opportunity to gain initiative, and you will either have or not have initiative at the start of a lane. So that's a somewhat important aspect. Like the first round of a lane can be extra impactful because you could get shut out of that lane, or your opponent could be shut out of that lane by you in the first round. So finally, I think splitting up the round by actions is the last thing, which is maybe actually the most obvious one, more obvious even than rounds, kind of, because of course, when you're actually clicking the turn token, you're clicking it to change between or turn token or taking actions, like actually playing cards. That is what changes who gets to play stuff, right? In Artifact, you play a card, it's your opponent's turn. Your opponent plays a card, it's your turn. You play an ability, it's your opponent's turn. Your opponent passes, it's your turn. Okay, it's the most basic unit. But the thing is that unlike turns in, say, Hearthstone or Magic the Gathering, not a lot changes between actions, right? You play a card, whatever that card does happens, and then it's your opponent's action. They do something, whatever they have done resolves, it happens, and then it's your turn. Whereas in, say, like most other card games, you would have a lot of aspects of lanes and of rounds occurring. You would use resources, you would gain new resources, the resources you have available would change between turns, right? How many of those, or whether all of those happen or not, kind of depends on the game. In particular, some more casual games that aren't as much of a direct comparison might have more in common with lanes, for example. than say like Hearthstone turns do. Hearthstone turns and Magic the Gathering turns are very similar to rounds, I would say. And then the lanes would almost be more like a phase in a Magic the Gathering turn. And I think that's pretty much the whole video. I just wanted to make a separate topic where I clarify this for the future, so that if I'm talking about this in a future video, where I go into more depth about some aspect of initiative, or playing between lanes, or playing on a certain round curve type thing, I'll be able to just point to this and say, this is what I'm talking about. This is how I've chosen to define the terminology for at least my own articles and videos. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Thank you all for watching. Yakri out.